Would you mind playing this?
Yeah, sure thing, lady.
In the early hours of August 5th, 1962, inside a low-slung Spanish-style house in Brentwood, Los Angeles, a light glowed beneath a locked bedroom door. On the other side lay the most recognizable woman in America, Marilyn Monroe. Face turned to the pillow, a phone near her hand, empty prescription bottles scattered on the nightstand like spent matches after a long storm. By dawn, the headline was ready: probable suicide, official, clinical, closed. Yet almost nothing about that night felt settled. Why were the authorities notified hours after Marilyn was discovered? Who exactly did she speak to in her final calls? The housekeeper said she sensed something wrong around midnight. Others placed those alarms much later. Neighbors recalled cars and voices. Some swore they had seen familiar men around the property earlier that evening, men who did not belong to the quiet cul-de-sac. And then there was the rumor that refused to die, the little red diary that may have contained names, dates, fragments of pillow talk that strayed from romance into the geography of power. To the world, she was the platinum blonde dream, the kiss blown to the back row, the voice like sunlight on champagne. But fame didn't muffle the old fears that had shadowed her since childhood. The fear of abandonment, the ache for safety, the terror of being loved for a mask rather than a face. She was on the verge of a comeback picture. She had new negotiations on the table, new photographs in the magazines, new conversations about respect and control. And still, something in those last hours tightened around her life like a fist. The questions multiply where the documents refused to speak. Was it despair, chemically abetted and tragically timed? Was it an accidental alchemy of pills and exhaustion? Or was there a darker choreography? Visitors unaccounted for, timelines rearranged, a narrative tidied up to protect reputations that stretched far beyond Hollywood. One name whispers through every retelling of the night: Kennedy. Another word trails behind it like a shadow: secret. Everyone thought she had it all: beauty, money, desire weaponized into myth. But myths are cages as often as they are crowns. The truth behind the locked door, the cool sheets, the motionless hand still curled toward the telephone, is not a single sentence on a coroner's line. It is a maze of contradictions, a story edited by fear, and a mystery that has outlived every person who claimed to solve it.
Part 2. Childhood and Formation. Before she was Marilyn, she was Norma Jean Mortensen, later baptized as Baker, born June 1, 1926, in Los Angeles. Her mother, Gladys, worked in film laboratories, splicing other people's dreams together while her own life frayed at the seams. Gladys battled mental illness and instability. The identity of Norma Jean's father was a blank space that adults filled with stories but never answers. From the very beginning, the child stood at the edge of absence, peering into it, learning how to smile at things that could disappear. Stability was a luxury the little girl rarely tasted. She moved through a carousel of addresses, guardians, and arrangements, sometimes with family friends, sometimes with strangers, sometimes in institutional care. The Los Angeles Orphans' Home offered order, but little tenderness. There were rules, schedules, rows of beds, and the solemn rituals of children teaching themselves how not to cry. Throughout these years, the fear of being sent away again became a silent teacher. It taught her how to be agreeable, how to perform gratitude, how to make herself wanted. It also planted a seed of hunger for attention that in time would bloom into a magnetism powerful enough to bend a room. There were bright days. Grace McKee, Gladys's friend and a kind of fairy godmother, brought glamour into the girl's life like contraband sunlight. Grace loved movies. She introduced Norma Jean to the spell of the screen, to the names of actresses whose faces floated larger than life and seemed to belong to a world where trouble couldn't follow. Grace saw in the child a spark, Those wide, searching eyes, that instinct to pose and play, the way she could transform shyness into charm if an audience of even one person appeared. Grace encouraged her to curl her hair, to walk with her head high, to imagine herself as someone who could be chosen. But the days tilted, as they so often did. Foster placements ended. Promises were broken. At times, danger slipped in where protection should have been. The shuttling between households made school a patchwork quilt. New classrooms, new desks, new classmates whose names she learned just as she was moved again. The constant uprooting wrote an early lesson across her heart. Nothing is guaranteed, not even the roof above you. Loneliness became a habit. The young Norma Jean invented small rituals to steady herself, memorizing lines from the pictures, practicing smiles in the mirror, pretending to be actresses whose names she whispered like talismans. In the dark of movie theaters, she watched the flicker of light stitch a different life across the screen. Women who were adored, protected, seen. She studied how they laughed, how they tilted their chins, how they turned even sorrow into something beautiful. If she could learn their grammar, perhaps she could rewrite her own story. When Gladys's illness worsened, the child learned a second lesson. Love can be real and still not be enough to keep a person present. That paradox would haunt her intimacy thereafter. She longed for proof that she would not be abandoned, and when she received devotion, she sometimes questioned it, testing its strength, fearing its collapse. The people who loved her tried to anchor her. The tide inside her often pulled harder. At 16, with the prospect of returning to institutional care looming as her latest living arrangement came to an end, Norma Jean made a choice shaped by necessity rather than romance. She married a reliable, kind young man, James Doherty. Marriage in that moment was not a storybook, it was a shield. It legalized a kind of safety, a shared apartment, a name on the mailbox, the promise, however fragile, that she would not be sent away. This decision, practical and hurried, would later be retold by tabloids as a sweet beginning. In truth, it was the survival logic of a girl who had learned to barter her future against the present's threats. While her husband shipped out with the merchant marines, the young wife found factory work supporting the war effort. There, in the clang and hum of industrial America, fate paused to notice her. A photographer, scouting for images to boost morale, saw a young woman whose face caught light like water. His pictures traveled further than anyone expected, first to company publications, then to modeling agencies. What had been a private practice in mirrors became a profession in front of lenses. By the late 1940s, magazine covers carried her image, a paradoxical blend of innocence and invitation. She learned the angles, the poses, the half-smile that suggested secrets. Agencies suggested she lighten her hair. Studios suggested a new name. A pattern emerged that would shape the rest of her life, transformation as strategy. If a name could be changed, perhaps a past could be rewritten. If a hair color could be altered, perhaps a destiny could be too. The girl who had been passed from hand to hand now chose who she would become, at least on paper. Yet inside, the old currents moved. She worked relentlessly, taking acting classes, reading plays aloud, watching how seasoned performers stole a scene with a gesture, a pause, a look. She wanted not merely to be looked at, but to be taken seriously. When the camera rolled, she learned to slow time, to let a line stretch just enough, to lace a joke with longing, to turn a walk across a room into a story. Directors noticed, so did audiences. Attention, once a life raft, began to feel like oxygen. Still, the child's ghost accompanied her. Rejection on set, an impatient note from a producer, a snicker from a co-star, could slice deeper than the moment warranted. praise was a salve that wore off quickly. The ache returned. She courted safety by becoming desirable and feared that desire would vanish the moment she stopped smiling. The world would come to call this paradox Marilyn. But when the lights were down and the day's makeup washed away, she was once again the girl listening for footsteps in the hall, wondering if they would pass her door or stop and stay. Formation, for her, was never just training or opportunity. It was the lifelong art of making a self sturdy enough to carry both the applause and the echo of emptiness that followed it. By the time Hollywood beckoned in earnest, Norma Jean had already done the hardest work of her life. She had taught herself to endure. Next, the town would teach her how to shine, and what it cost to do so.
Part 3. Rise to Fame. The journey from Norma Jean Mortensen, the fragile foster child, to Marilyn Monroe, the incandescent star, was not a fairy tale written overnight. It was the slow, grinding transformation of a young woman who refused to vanish into the background. If childhood had taught her one thing, it was that invisibility meant abandonment. Fame, then, became not just a dream, but a survival strategy, a way to prove to the world, and perhaps to herself, that she truly existed. The first glimpse of stardom. In the summer of 1945, while working at the Radioplane Munitions Factory in Burbank, a photographer from the U.S. Army Air Forces motioned her out of the shadows of the assembly line. His name was David Conover, and his assignment was simple: document women helping the war effort. But when he raised the lens, what he captured was not another factory worker in coveralls. It was a face that seemed to bend the light toward itself. Conover later admitted that through his camera, Norma Jean appeared almost luminous. That image circulated through military publications and before long reached the eyes of modeling scouts. For a girl who had once practiced smiles in cracked mirrors, the validation was intoxicating. Offers rolled in: pin-up shoots, magazine spreads, advertisements for toothpaste and bathing suits. Each photo session was a lesson in reinvention. The girl who had moaned neglect now learned how to command desire. But modeling was a stepping stone. Even then, she set her sights higher. The silver screen, not glossy paper, was her true destination. Reinventing herself. Hollywood, however, demanded transformation. A casting agent told her bluntly, "Norma Jean will never make the marquee." A new name was suggested: short, musical, easy to remember. She borrowed Monroe from her grandmother's surname, and Marilyn was inspired by Broadway star Marilyn Miller. With peroxide applied to her naturally brown curls, she became the archetype studios were eager to mold: the platinum blonde with an aura of both innocence and temptation. But the reinvention was not purely superficial. She worked tirelessly on her craft. While many dismissed her as a pretty face, she studied acting at night, devouring plays, taking lessons with the actor's studio, and practicing expressions until they felt second nature. Unlike many of her contemporaries, she was self-aware. She understood that the Marilyn persona was both her ticket in and the cage she would later struggle to escape. The first roles. Her earliest film appearances were fleeting, blink and you miss them parts in Dangerous Years, 1947, and Scooda-Hoo, Scooda-Hey, 1948. Most audiences never noticed her, but to studio executives, there was something undeniable about the way she filled even a sliver of screen time. In All About Eve, 1950, playing a young, ambitious starlet, she only had a handful of lines, but she glowed so brightly that critics noted her presence alongside legends like Bette Davis.
Marilyn was still more often photographed than respected. She became a fixture of cheesecake calendars and pin-up posters, the kind taped inside lockers and sent overseas to soldiers. The most famous of these was a nude calendar, photographed in 1949 when she was struggling financially. Years later, when it surfaced, scandal threatened. Instead, she disarmed the public with a simple confession. Yes, it was her, and yes, she had done it because she needed the rent. Her honesty only increased her appeal. Breakthrough. The real turning point came in 1953. Niagara showcased her as a smoldering femme fatale. With her slow, deliberate walk and voice like liquid heat, she was suddenly no longer just a pinup. She was a star. That same year, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes was released, featuring her now iconic performance of Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend. Draped in pink satin, surrounded by men in tuxedos, she sang about love and money with a wink that made audiences laugh and ache at the same time. It was camp, yes, but also clever, and it solidified Marilyn Monroe as a global phenomenon. In How to Marry a Millionaire in 1953, alongside Betty Grable and Lauren Bacall, Marilyn proved she could hold her own in a lineup of established stars. By 1954, the 7-year itch gave the world one of the most famous images in cinematic history, Marilyn standing above a subway grate, her white dress billowing upward as she laughed in mock surprise. The photo became instantly legendary, but behind it simmered private turmoil. Her then-husband, Joe DiMaggio, stood in the crowd that night, visibly furious as hundreds of men ogled her wife. The marriage would dissolve soon after. Fame and fracture. By the mid-1950s, Marilyn Monroe was a household name. Her films were box office gold, her face was everywhere, and her personal life was devoured by tabloids. Yet even at her peak, she battled the gnawing suspicion that the world only wanted the illusion she projected, not the woman behind it. She once said, "People had a habit of looking at me as if I were some kind of mirror. They didn't see me, they saw their own lewd thoughts." This tension grew unbearable on film sets. Directors accused her of being difficult, arriving late, forgetting lines, demanding retakes. What they missed was that she was often paralyzed by stage fright, numbing herself with pills just to step onto the set. Behind the glamour was a perfectionist, terrified of disappointing, a woman who demanded respect but doubted she deserved it. In 1955, desperate to be taken seriously, she founded her own production company, Marilyn Monroe Productions, a bold move in an industry dominated by men. She negotiated better contracts, sought out challenging roles, and fought for artistic control. Critics who once dismissed her began to reconsider. In Bus Stop, 1956, she played a weary saloon singer with a vulnerability that critics praised as her best work yet. Her performance in Some Like It Hot became legendary, earning her a Golden Globe. Co-star Tony Curtis famously quipped that kissing her was like kissing Hitler, frustrated by her tardiness and unpredictability. But audiences adored her, and her comedic timing was impeccable. The cost of stardom. Fame gave her everything she thought she wanted, adoration, power, independence, but it also deepened her isolation. Crowds screamed her name, yet in private she confessed to friends, "I'm the world's most famous misfit." Every triumph came with backlash. Every role that hinted at complexity was countered by another that pigeonholed her as the dumb blonde. Her marriages crumbled under the weight of her public life. Joe DiMaggio could not reconcile his protective instincts with her need for the spotlight. Arthur Miller, at first enchanted by her vulnerability, grew distant when confronted by her instability. She found herself adrift, clinging to barbiturates and alcohol to numb the pain of insomnia, self-doubt, and endless scrutiny. Still, the world loved her. Crowds gathered at airports, reporters followed her relentlessly, and men compared every new starlet to her glow. Marilyn Monroe was no longer a person, she was an archetype, a myth in motion. Yet myths are fragile. Behind the laughter of Some Like It Hot and the sparkle of Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend was a woman terrified of being left behind once more. By husbands, by studios, by the very public that had created her. The rise was dazzling, but already fractures threatened the foundation. Hollywood had placed her on a pedestal so high that when the fall came, it would echo for generations. Part 4. Dark Side and Downfall. By the late 1950s, Marilyn Monroe was one of the most recognizable women in the world. Her films sold out theaters, her image was printed on magazines across continents, and her every move was followed with obsessive fascination. Yet behind the platinum hair and megawatt smile, Marilyn was slipping further into a spiral of dependency, depression, and disillusionment. The higher she climbed, the lonelier the summit became. Cracks in the fairy tale. Her second marriage, to baseball icon Joe DiMaggio, had ended abruptly in 1954. The official reason was mental cruelty, but the truth was rooted in incompatible worlds. DiMaggio wanted domestic stability, a wife waiting at home. Marilyn was a public spectacle, her body ogled by thousands of strangers every day. He was enraged by her subway grate scene in The 7-Year Itch, not because it was unfaithful, but because it belonged to everyone but him. Their union lasted only 9 months, but the scars of jealousy, of her longing to be cherished for herself and not her image, lingered. Her third marriage, to celebrated playwright Arthur Miller, began in 1956 with the aura of intellectual romance. She believed he saw her soul where others only saw curves. But marriage to Miller introduced new fractures. Marilyn longed for his approval, to be understood not just as a star, but as a serious artist. Yet Miller, in private notes she later discovered, sometimes wrote of her as a disappointment. Those words cut deeper than any tabloid headline. If even the man she idolized could not find satisfaction in her, what chance did she have? The marriage deteriorated under the pressure of her addictions and insecurities. She miscarried several times, each loss compounding her depression. At the same time, Miller grew frustrated with her dependency on barbiturates and her erratic behavior on set. Their union, meant to be her salvation, became another reminder that love could dissolve as quickly as applause. Pills, anxiety, and the studio system. Marilyn's struggles were not unique in Hollywood, but they were magnified by her fame. The studio system treated stars like machines, churning out pictures, photo shoots, publicity stunts. Marilyn, who already suffered from crippling stage fright, turned to pills to steady herself. First, it was to sleep, then to wake, then to dull the tremors of anxiety before filming. Doctors, eager to please a famous patient, prescribed freely. The result was a toxic cocktail of barbiturates, sedatives, and stimulants that blurred the edges of her days. On set, her reputation grew chaotic. She was late, sometimes hours late, keeping entire crews waiting. Directors complained, co-stars grumbled, and journalists painted her as unprofessional. But beneath the delays was a woman paralyzed by fear. Fear of forgetting lines, fear of ridicule, fear of being exposed as a fraud. She once confessed, "I'm afraid of being forgotten. I don't want to be just another blonde." By 1960, the tension was visible. During the filming of The Misfits, written by Arthur Miller for her, Marilyn's health collapsed. She was hospitalized for exhaustion and overdose scares, while her marriage to Miller disintegrated in the Nevada desert. The movie would be her last completed film, and tragically, the final screen appearance of Clark Gable, who died shortly after shooting. Marilyn blamed herself, convinced that her delays and stress had contributed to his death. The Kennedy connection. As her personal life unraveled, Marilyn became entangled in relationships that blurred the line between intimacy and danger. Among them were her alleged affairs with President John F. Kennedy and his brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy. The public saw only hints. Her sultry "Happy Birthday, Mr. President" performance at Madison Square Garden in May 1962, wearing a skin-tight rhinestone gown that seemed painted onto her body. She whispered into the microphone, "Happy birthday to you, Mr. President," and the room erupted. The intimacy of her delivery, broadcast across the nation, fueled speculation of an affair with the most powerful man in the country. But whispers soon turned darker. Rumors spread that Marilyn kept a red diary filled with notes from her conversations with the Kennedys, conversations that allegedly touched not only on romance, but on politics, Cuba, and nuclear secrets. Whether this diary ever truly existed remains a mystery, but the possibility was enough to make her dangerous. To some, she was not just a movie star, she was a liability, a woman who knew too much. Isolation and breakdown. By 1961, Marilyn's life was unraveling. She was institutionalized at Payne Whitney Psychiatric Clinic in New York after a mental breakdown. She later described the experience as terrifying, claiming she was treated less like a patient than a prisoner, locked in a padded cell. It was Joe DiMaggio, her ex-husband, who ultimately came to her rescue, demanding her release. Despite their failed marriage, DiMaggio remained one of the few people who consistently tried to protect her. In her final years, they rekindled a quiet friendship, and he even spoke of remarrying her. Yet Marilyn's health continued to decline. She swung between moments of lucidity and spirals of despair. She was fired from Something's Got to Give in 1962 after repeated absences, though the studio later rehired her under mounting public sympathy. Photographers captured her looking radiant in a poolside publicity shoot, a glimpse of the star reborn. But it was only a mask. Behind the scenes, her dependency on drugs deepened. Hollywood turns cold. The cruel paradox of Marilyn's downfall was that even as her personal life disintegrated, her myth grew stronger. Magazines printed her every stumble, her every hospital visit, her every rumor. Audiences devoured her pain like entertainment, proof that even goddesses could bleed. Hollywood, once eager to exploit her, now saw her as a liability. Behind studio doors, executives debated whether she was worth the risk. Marilyn knew it. She feared the clock was running out, that the industry was preparing to move on without her. Each new blonde ingenue was touted as the next Marilyn, a phrase that both flattered and crushed her. She confessed to a friend, "It might be kind of a relief to be finished." She had become the most famous woman in the world, yet she was never more alone.
Part 5. Climax and Tragedy. On the evening of August 4th, 1962, the Brentwood neighborhood of Los Angeles was calm. A summer breeze drifted through palm trees, the kind of night when the city seemed to sigh with relief after the day's glare. Inside 12305 Fifth Helena Drive, however, tension clung to the air like static. Marilyn Monroe, 36 years old, world famous but increasingly fragile, was retreating into the silence of her home. The final hours. That afternoon, she spoke with friends on the phone. Her publicist, her psychiatrist, even colleagues, all reported nothing unusual. Some said she sounded upbeat, even hopeful,
talking about upcoming projects and her plans to return to the screen with Something's Got to Give. There was talk of new contracts, of regaining control over her career. She had posed just weeks earlier for a glowing Life magazine spread, naked but draped in a blanket, smiling with youthful energy. To the public eye, Marilyn Monroe seemed poised for a comeback. But beneath the surface, darker currents stirred. Her dependency on barbiturates was worsening, her trust in those around her thinning. She felt watched, manipulated, and abandoned by Hollywood. To some, she appeared resilient. To others, teetering on collapse. The truth was she embodied both at once. That night, she retired to her bedroom early. Her housekeeper, Eunice Murray, recalled seeing the actress drift inside and close the door behind her. A light glowed beneath the frame. Hours later, at 3:30 a.m., Murray claimed she awoke with a strange sense of dread. When she knocked on Marilyn's door and received no reply, she called her psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson. By the time he arrived and broke into the locked room, the image before him was one that would be etched into history. Marilyn Monroe, lying face down, nude, clutching a telephone. Empty pill bottles scattered nearby. The official story. The police arrived after 4 a.m. Their report was terse, clinical. Probable suicide due to overdose. Marilyn had long been known for her insomnia, her anxiety, her reliance on pills. To the authorities, this was simply the inevitable culmination of a long, tragic decline. But almost immediately, contradictions appeared. Why did hours pass between when she was found and when the police were contacted? Why were some of the pill bottles empty, yet no water glass was found in the room? Why were her organs not properly preserved during autopsy, preventing later toxicology tests from clarifying the dose? And why did witnesses contradict each other? Some claiming Robert Kennedy was in Los Angeles that night, others swearing he was hundreds of miles away. The inconsistencies sparked a firestorm of speculation that has never been extinguished. The Kennedy connection. Marilyn's alleged affairs with President John F. Kennedy and Attorney General Robert Kennedy had become an open secret among Hollywood insiders. The performance of Happy Birthday, Mr. President at Madison Square Garden just 3 months earlier had all but confirmed it in the public's imagination. Delivered in a whispering, breathless tone, clad in a dress so tight it had to be sewn onto her body, Marilyn's song was equal parts celebration and seduction. The footage became legendary, fueling rumors of a dangerous intimacy with the most powerful family in America. By August, however, those relationships had soured. Some claim Marilyn felt discarded by the Kennedys, furious at being treated as disposable. Others whisper she threatened to go public, exposing not only her affairs but conversations that brushed against matters of state. Whether such threats were real or exaggerated remains contested, but to those invested in secrecy, even the possibility may have been intolerable. The missing diary. Central to the conspiracy theories is the so-called Red Diary, which Marilyn was rumored to keep in her final months. According to friends, it contained her most private thoughts, notes on phone calls, details about powerful men, fragments of her turbulent life. After her death, the diary reportedly vanished. Some insist it never existed. Others believe it was confiscated the night she died. Its absence only deepened suspicion that Marilyn had become entangled in forces larger than herself. Alternate theories. The official narrative of suicide by overdose has been challenged repeatedly over the decades. Alternative theories include accidental overdose. Marilyn had long misused barbiturates, often mixing different prescriptions. Some argue she simply lost track of the doses and the tragedy was an accident. Medical negligence. Others claim her doctors overprescribed, creating a lethal dependency, then failed to monitor her properly. Political silencing. The most explosive theory is that Marilyn was silenced because she knew too much about the Kennedys, Cuba, or other sensitive matters. Supporters of this view point to inconsistencies in witness testimonies and missing evidence. Cover-up of a botched rescue. Some suggest she overdosed accidentally, but attempt to revive her or delay medical attention led to her death, with the cover-up orchestrated to protect reputations. No theory has ever been definitively proven. The result is a cloud of mystery, half-truths, and speculation that keeps her final night suspended in uncertainty. The image of death. What is beyond dispute is the stark image that remains. A woman once worshipped by millions, lying alone in a locked room, clutching a telephone that could not save her. She had reached out, perhaps literally in her final moments, but no one answered in time. The image contrasts cruelly with the persona she had built. Marilyn Monroe, the eternal seductress, desired by presidents and adored by the world. In the end, she was Norma Jean again, small, vulnerable, silenced. The world reacts. News of her death spread like wildfire on the morning of August 5th. Fans wept openly in the streets. Headlines screamed of tragedy, mystery, scandal. Joe DiMaggio, grief-stricken, claimed her body and arranged her funeral, deliberately excluding Hollywood elites whom he blamed for exploiting her. For 20 years after her death, DiMaggio sent roses to her crypt 3 times a week. Hollywood reeled. Some co-stars spoke of her genius, others of her chaos. Studios scrambled to manage the fallout, burying the production of Something's Got to Give. The public, however, was less forgiving of the official explanations. Polls showed that a majority of Americans doubted the suicide verdict. For them, the brightest star of the century could not simply have extinguished herself. There had to be more. A curtain that never closed. More than 60 years later, Marilyn Monroe's death remains one of Hollywood's most enduring mysteries. Every decade brings new books, documentaries, and supposed revelations. Files are unsealed, witnesses speak, theories collide, but the truth slips through the cracks. Perhaps it always will. What endures is not certainty, but fascination. The image of her final night has fused with her legend. Just as audiences projected fantasies onto her life, now they project conspiracies onto her death. She is frozen in time, forever 36, forever asking for love through a lens that only reflected desire. Marilyn Monroe did not live to tell her own story. Others wrote it for her. Directors, journalists, lovers, politicians, biographers. But in her final hours, the silence of her locked room became her last performance. A stage without an audience, a scene without a script, a tragedy without a clear ending.
Part 6. Legacy and Reflection. Marilyn Monroe's life ended in silence, but her legend only grew louder with time. Death froze her in an eternal glow, captured in photographs, in celluloid reels, in whispered myths. She was gone at 36, but the image she left behind became immortal, brighter, perhaps, than she had ever been in life. The icon endures. In the decades since 1962, Marilyn has remained a fixture of global culture. Her films, Some Like It Hot, Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, Niagara, The 7-Year Itch, are studied not only for their entertainment value, but for the charisma she infused into every frame. To watch her on screen is to see a paradox, a woman radiating confidence, yet betraying vulnerability in the flicker of her eyes. It is that paradox that keeps her alive long after the credits roll. Artists seized upon her image almost immediately.
Andy Warhol's neon portraits turned her face into pop art, mass-produced and endlessly replicated, a commentary on both celebrity culture and her own commodification. Singers, writers, and fashion designers have invoked her name for decades. Madonna modeled performances on her persona. Elton John's Candle in the Wind immortalized her as a fragile flame extinguished too soon. She became a brand, a muse, a cautionary tale, and an aspiration all at once. Few stars achieve such multiplicity. Fewer still maintain it for over half a century. The human beneath the myth. Yet beyond the glamour lies the aching truth. Marilyn Monroe was not only a symbol, she was Norma Jean, the foster child who longed for permanence, the young woman who craved to be seen beyond her body, the actress who wanted respect for her talent. Friends remembered her humor, her intelligence, her deep hunger for books and ideas. She was not the dumb blonde she was so often forced to play. In fact, she despised that stereotype. Arthur Miller, despite their fractured marriage, later admitted that she possessed a kind of raw sensitivity most people could not handle. She was too fragile for this world, he said. Others, like Lee Strasberg of the Actors Studio, described her as one of the most dedicated students they ever taught, willing to rip her soul open for the sake of authenticity. The irony of Marilyn's legacy is that the world adored the mask while often overlooking the woman behind it. We loved the character, but did we ever really know the person inside? A legacy of loneliness and resilience. Her story continues to resonate because it reflects universal human contradictions. She was adored, yet isolated. Powerful, yet powerless. Beautiful, yet broken. Millions see in her the dangers of fame, the cruelty of a system that consumes women while demanding they remain forever young, forever desirable. But her life is not only a tragedy, it is also a testament to resilience. From a fractured childhood, she clawed her way into an industry designed to devour her. She refused to be invisible. She insisted on her presence, even when it cost her peace. In doing so, she carved a place in history that no scandal, no rumor, no conspiracy has ever erased. The eternal question. The mystery of her death lingers, unsolved, debated in books and documentaries with each passing decade. Was it suicide, accident, murder? The truth may never be fully known. Perhaps the more important question is not how she died, but what her life tells us about the cost of desire, of power, of being seen. Marilyn once said, "I don't mind living in a man's world as long as I can be a woman in it." Those words echo across time, capturing both her defiance and her vulnerability. She was a woman trying to define herself in a world eager to define her for its own purposes. Closing reflection. More than 60 years later, Marilyn Monroe is still with us, in the smile painted on billboards, in the whisper of a song, in the quiet ache of an unfinished life. She was more than just a star. She was a human being, struggling to be seen, to be loved, to be understood. And perhaps that is why her story endures. Because behind every fantasy, behind every myth, there is a little girl who once whispered into the dark, "Don't forget me." So what do you think? Was Marilyn Monroe's death the tragic act of a broken soul, or the silencing of a woman who knew too much? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories of Hollywood's brightest and darkest stars.